So we're going to use our time. Well, so here's what I want to say about interactiveness for this next section. It's very important to get your input, your feedback. What we want are the comments that are relevant to the slide we're on, and not the comments that are relevant to the slide 2 slides from now. So to do that,
how are we going to know?
So to do that, what I'm going to ask is if you have a comment or question about what's there, that's relevant. We should take that at this moment. But if you have a question about what's not there, then hold it because it might be coming. Does that make sense? Yes. Comments or questions about what you see in front of you and what's being discussed? Yes. Questions about what you don't see yet? Okay?
Ready to go? Okay. Thank you. So my name is Steve Calabro. Obviously, I work for Stantec. And my job today is to introduce the Orleans Modified Traditional Bookend. And I want to thank Lauren and her team for all the work they've done on site assessments, because it's really difficult to really come up with an Orleans Modified Traditional Bookend unless you have an idea of what's available as far as sites go. So you may recall a couple of meetings ago we put up a traditional bookend, and it didn't really look very detailed, and there wasn't a lot of information on it, and part of the reason was because we hadn't really done our site assessment. Before we get into the discussion of the modified bookend, I'd like to just review a couple of wastewater treatment plant size nomenclatures, just so we're all on the same page. So, a couple of things. When we talk about a central treatment facility, okay, generally what that means is that it's usually a facility that's greater than 100,000 gallons per day, usually a lot larger. It has at the facility, obviously, wastewater treatment and disposal. It usually has some type of septage receiving and treatment. It usually has some form of sludge handling and disposal. It has, a laboratory testing facility for doing testing. It has a maintenance shop for doing maintenance. It's got locker rooms and a lunchroom, a meeting area for the staff. It's a significant facility. And then the next step from that is we'll talk about satellite treatment facilities. Satellite treatment facilities are usually supported by a central treatment facility. They're usually in the range of 10,000 gallons per day to about 100,000 gallons per day. Anything less than 10,000 gallons per day falls under Title 5. Obviously, it has wastewater treatment and disposal. That's the purpose of it. As far as sludge goes, sludge is handled a lot less detailed. It'll have sludge storage, maybe some sludge thickening, but the sludge is pumped out on a regular basis and brought someplace else. It might have a small area for some laboratory testing with test kits, maybe a small maintenance and storage area, but nothing really significant. It needs to be supported from some other facility. And then the third size facility that we talk about would be a cluster treatment facility. And that's usually in the range of 2,000 gallons per day to 9,900 gallons per day. Falls under the Title V regulations. Might handle 25 or 30 homes. It provides wastewater treatment and disposal. That's pretty much it. Excess sludge is pumped out with tanker trucks. It has very little support systems. The cluster systems that we design in our office are usually done for developers. They have a site. They figure out what they want to do with the site. We estimate the wastewater treatment, and we come up with a cluster treatment system for them for that type of thing. So we'll be talking about some of this in the traditional bookend. You'll see central treatment and satellite treatment. Some interesting information. This curve was done, is from a report that was done a while back looking at the size of different facilities. And I just wanted to, it's a little bit old right now, but I just wanted to show, so if in the centralized treatment system range, 100,000 to 1 million gallons per day, you know, the average construction cost is about $25 per gallon capacity. When you move to the satellite treatment range, you know, 10,000 gallons to 100,000 gallons, the, you know, typical average cost is $55 per gallon. These are strictly construction costs. So you can see there's a significant increase. And then for cluster systems, you know, in that 1,000 to 10,000 gallon per day range, the number is more in the $80 per gallon range for construction. So there's a pretty significant cost difference. The operation and maintenance costs sort of follow a similar curve.
Okay, very well.
Because we have touched on remote disposal,
Yes.
how do these numbers manage the question of disposal costs?
Well, that's sort of the point I'm getting.
Is this treatment only?
Yes.
That's construction cost, treatment only, correct?
Thank you, thank you.
Right.
I'm sorry, I can't find a single aggregate number for wastewater treatment need per day for Orleans in gallons.
We'll get to that. Yes. Yep.
Yes. What you see, not what you don't see, yes.
For, when you say treat, and I know that what central systems do
Yes.
pretty well.
Yep.
When you get to satellite and cluster, what is it we're treating for? Are nitrogen and phosphorus both dealt with?
Well, in this analysis, the treatment, level of treatment would be the same.
As-
That's,
As central?
yes, right, right.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So, you know, size versus capital cost, you know, due to challenges such as, you know, locating and procuring, you know, multiple sites. You heard from Lauren that, you know, there aren't hundreds and hundreds of sites available. You know, every time you do a separate treatment facility, there's significant permitting effort per site. And then due to capital and operations and maintenance costs, you know, really, you know, we're going to be focusing, as far as the traditional bookend goes, we're going to be focusing on centralized and satellite treatment plant sizes, not cluster systems. And I hope that makes sense to folks, just as an introduction. Okay. So, the Orleans modified traditional bookend, that's this map that you have, all the pretty colors. And I just wanted to just go over what went into the development of the Orleans modified traditional bookend. So, you know, one of the first things we did is we looked at, the Cape Cod Commission produced an Orleans traditional bookend scenario. So we basically looked at that. The second item is we went back to the CWMP, which there was a lot of thought and effort put into that. So we looked at the overall sewered areas that were shown in the CWMP, because those areas had a lot more input as far as convenience issues and various sanitary issues. We confirmed that the areas required to solve some of the freshwater ponds issues, we confirmed that those areas were shown. We considered the need to eliminate groundwater discharge at Tri-Town, which is something that the selectmen have put forward. So we're trying to come up with a system that honors that. We used the potential viable treatment plant sites that Lauren and her team put together. And then basically we took all that information and we put it into the Cape Cod Tracker program to confirm that there was sufficient nitrogen removal to comply with the TMDLs. And basically the result is a bookend. It's a traditional bookend. It's not a recommendation. It's a bookend that will be used in discussions with the non-traditional bookend. So, so on the map here, I'll just go over a couple of key features. The first item is that basically we're showing centralized treatment functions and some septic handling at the Tri-Town site. Now that's treatment. site exists, there are facilities there. So that's one of the key features. The next key feature is the use of 3 satellite treatment facilities in different areas of town. So instead of trying to move all the flow to Tri-Town, treating it all at Tri-Town, and then trying to figure out a way to dispose of all that flow someplace else, we came up with 3 satellite treatment facilities that will greatly help reduce the amount of flow that needs to go to Tri-Town. We made a conscious effort to move as much effluent disposal away from Nantucket as possible, and right now treated effluent disposal will happen at sites 5, 6, and 7 that are shown on the map. We included a reclaimed water system in the overall traditional bookend, basically to assist in distributing effluent disposal away from the Tri-Town site, and due to some of the beneficial uses. And there's one beneficial use I'll talk about a little bit later for reclaimed water. And obviously, you know, the TMDLs are met with this traditional bookend. And there is, on this bookend, there is sewering along key areas of the freshwater ponds, which are included. So those are the highlights. So what I've done is I've taken the map, and this is the upper section. And I'll try to point out a couple of key areas. Now, just to let you know, when I'm finished here, Lou Sirocco has gone through each of the sub-watersheds. He's input the information into the tracker programs and has done all the analysis related to nitrogen removal and making sure that we meet the TMDL. So Lou is going to talk about each sub-watershed individually when I get done. But you can see this is the Tri-Town site. The dark purple and the light purple and the Rock Harbor area, if those areas were to be sewered, they would go to Tri-Town. This is one of the satellite treatment sites, which would take this area, basically getting this area, you know, away from Tri-Town. Oops. So this is what the flows look like. Yes. They could be separate or they could be combined. So this is how the flows work out. The downtown economic development area, which is the dark purple, would generate approximately 94,000 gallons per day. Now, just for full disclosure, the flows that we're showing are present-day average flows. We haven't tried to project future flows or peak flows that would happen at a later point. So everything is basically average daily flows. So the downtown economic development area would generate 94,000 gallons per day. Town Cove, 66,000 gallons per day to Tri-Town. The Crystal Lakes sub-watershed, about 9,200 to Tri-Town. Rock Harbor, we're trying to plan for the worst case, assuming that the UAA reclassification is denied. Hopefully it won't be, but if it is denied and we have to sewer that area, it would go to Tri-Town at 29,000 gallons per hour. So you have a subtotal of almost 200,000 gallons per day. If you put in an allowance for septage, I just picked 50,000 gallons per day because that's what it is. It could be 30. That gives you approximately 250,000 gallons per day that would go to Tri-Town for treatment, with disposal at sites 5, 6, and 7 as a traditional book.
So just to understand the flows, those are actually property by property water records from our water department
Correct.
from this past year? I mean, what are we talking
In
here?
the past 6 months.
6 months, correct.
Um,
Average.
You finished? We have a skewed flow in town, so during the winter months, maybe from October through April, there's a baseline, and that, I don't know what that number is, but then you got peak flows for the summer months.
Correct.
And I assume that would go some other place rather than,
Correct. I have a graphic
Okay.
that I'll show for that. All right, so let's move on here. Looking at that, the small satellite treatment system I showed, so the Mill Pond area would generate 17,300 gallons per day. Meeting House and Poaching Neck, 86,700. That gives us a subtotal of about 100,000 gallons per day. Obviously, there would be no septage disposed of at that facility because it's a satellite plant. And there would be both satellite treatment and disposal at sites 15 and 16 somehow. And so, you know, one of the benefits is now we're diverting 100,000 gallons per day away from the Tri-Town area and basically discharging to the Atlantic watershed, which has a lot of capacity. Okay, so looking at the lower area of the graph, there are right now 2 satellite treatment systems that are shown. They're the sites, the site that's 21 and 25 that Lauren discussed. And just to start talking about this red dashed line that you see, that's a recycle line, recycle or purple pipeline, if you will. Reclaimed, I'm sorry. We're trying to get our nomenclature correct. So this is how the flows show up. So Pilgrim Lake, Lonnie's, Nemaquite, Aries, put them all together, you get about 51,400 gallons per day. They would go to, treatment would be at satellite site 2021, and disposal at the same areas. And then the lower part, Deep Pond and Pleasant Bay, 59,800 gallons per day. Would be treated at site 25 and disposal at site 25.
Clarify, site 20 is not a site that's being considered as a conservation land.
Oh, 20 was the one that was taken off? Okay, so it's just 20. Okay. So we have the modified traditional bookend. So as far as Tri-Town flow options go, I just wanted to sort of review this. Assuming that we use the 3 satellite sites, the average daily flow at Tri-Town is approximately 250,000 gallons per day. That's a lot less than what was proposed in the current CWMP. If for some reason satellite treatment sites can't be secured for some reason, or they can't be used for some reason, and all the flow had to go to Tri-Town, which we're desperately trying to avoid, the flow number would be 460,000 gallons per day. So you can see the benefit of the satellite treatment plant sites.
And again, that's based on average daily flows of
Right,
water use for 6 months.
correct.
And that's just treatment only.
That's just treatment only, correct. So under my notes, you know, the more flow that goes to Tri-Town, the more difficult it'll be to achieve effluent disposal away from Tri-Town and Muskego. And a reclaimed water system will really help in the effort to divert effluent disposal away from Tri-Town and Muskego, especially in the summer when wastewater flows are high. And I'll show you what that graph looks like. So here's the graph. So you can see the light blue is water use and the brown is what was estimated as wastewater flow. So January, February, March, you know, the flows are low. April, May, you know, now June, July, August, you start getting the peaks. September, October, November, December starts to drop off. So if we were to use a recycle water system, instead of trying to satisfy these peaks as far as effluent disposal, that water could go into the recycle loop and could be used at maybe a number of golf courses that could use the water for irrigation, and basically take the disposal peak away from our disposal sites.
So, John?
In looking at the disposal capacity in this matrix,
Yep.
And there appears to be the red, the orange goes up behind the blue as well.
Yep, absolutely.
So when we're looking at disposal capacity, what's the right number to look at in terms of just the absolute physical capacity of the systems that we're considering? Is it, for example, approximately 1.4 million gallons per day?
Per month. That's.
I'm sorry, per month.
These are gallons per month?
These are million gallons
A month.
per month.
Right.
Right, okay, so you did the
Then we
math.
divide it by 30.
30, okay, yep.
So it's approximately 1.4 million gallons per day is the maximum capacity that we'll need.
Without a recycle loop, and would be the sum of all the disposal sites.
I think I understand. Okay.
And I guess, you make a very good point.
Well, the reason I'm asking
Yep.
is that at some point in the financial analysis, we're going to need to be doing metrics in terms of dollars spent
Yep.
per unit of capacity.
Right,
And so I'm trying to understand exactly what the right
right,
metric to use is.
right. Now, what Lauren described is she described her sizing criteria, the capacities that she showed, at 3 gallons per square foot per day disposal. Now, during these high peak periods, we may need to load those sites up at 5 gallons per square foot per day, but it would only be during those short periods of time. But a reclaimed water system has a huge benefit, and that's why we wanted to include it in our traditional alternative.
So I'm looking at this, and this is a much larger footprint of soaring than was the CWMP. And I understand you're working from a place of saying the selectmen have determined they don't wish to use Namscayket, so therefore there's no, I assume, no taking it there. But it would seem to me that as a bookend, that should have been the starting point to be able to then compare and look at what kind of savings there might be from this. This is a much larger footprint, as I say. It's going to sewer many more properties than the original. It just seems like the starting point, the best starting point would have been what was done, and that was done at 30-year build-out, not at existing now.
Right.
If you added 30-year build-out, this would be a much, much larger footprint.
I think
The more places you sewer, the more money you spend, and I agree that water reclamation is a great idea. It's hugely expensive. So I think there needs to be that consideration in looking as well. What are we going to spend to reclaim water in order to avoid Namscayket? And I'm not saying use Namscayket. I'm just saying I think we need to look at all the information going into this.
when we start costing things out, you're right, it's going to be very interesting. Lou is going to describe each sub-watershed, but one of the things that happens is during the CWMP, TMDLs weren't available. So we did do exactly what you were talking, well, the tracker program wasn't available.
Well, Tracker
to-
wasn't, but the TMD
to
was.
do the calculation.
I think we're all waiting for Tracker, frankly. That was going to be up and available.
Right. So what we did was, we took the area that was shown in the CWMP, ran it through Tracker, and when there was a shortfall of nitrogen removed, we had to increase the sewer areas. And just one other point. The second point is, when you dispose of the treated effluent in the same watershed that you're sewering, you have to increase the size of what you're sewering to compensate for the amount of nitrogen
right.
that you're putting back.
Exactly my point.
So,
Right.
I just want to say one thing about Tracker. Sorry that I meant to say this at the beginning with the action items. So the plan is to get you all a version of the Tracker that actually shows you the calculations used for both this and the non-traditional scenarios. that allows you to dig in and understand the formulas and where all this came from, but that doesn't allow multiple new versions to get generated and sent around in such a way that people could get really confused, right? People, so that's what's underway. They're trying to sort of technologically get there, not to hide anything, but just to avoid it becoming something where things get confusing for the public. That will be available. The goal is to get that available to you prior to the next meeting and really as soon as possible.
The other comment on why it was delayed is that Stantec has been working with the commission to take Lou and his team to take what we've done, Stantec's done in Tracker, and vet that with the commission and make sure they're using it consistent with the way the commission has set it up to be used. And I think that just happened this week. So that's the reason for that. We didn't want to send something out and then have the commission say that's not the way we do it. So that closure was critical to getting it to people. And we still have a lot of time to be working with Tracker. This is just the beginning.
So Jeff, then Paul.
I think we need to, at this point, accept this as a conceptual plan. And the primary reason is that the piping, including the recycling piping, but the collection piping, hasn't been included or discussed. And for the centralized plant, the piping piece can be 80% of the cost. So we've discussed 20% of the cost. We've ignored 80%. So let's take this as a conceptual plan and wait until the numbers get thrown into it before we get too carried away about how we make the trade-off.
It's a bookend.
Bookend, that's my point. It's supposed to be a bookend.
What you call reclaimed water,
Yes.
how do I imagine you would perceive that being used in Orleans or wherever?
Yeah, that's next.
What's a realistic,
That's next.
Realistic.
yeah, is that another slide?
That's coming. That's
Sorry?
coming.
Okay.
Sims?
I am.
Trying to stick to the ground rules about what we've seen
Yeah.
here. I understand why average daily flow has been used in the calculations and the presentation of the theoretical bookend. But we need to be absolutely crystal clear that all of the previous efforts have used peak flow numbers. And then when we start costing out infrastructure, it's going to have to be costed out at peak flow. So those numbers are not going to be consistent through the progress of this discussion.
Absolutely. We agree. I agree 100%.
Costs have to be done by month by month.
Just a clarification on the figure, the map of the phase 1 and phase 2 water reuse lines.
Yes.
The phase 2 line is approximately 4 miles, so that's the rose-colored dotted line. And then the phase 1 line is 9 miles. But then you have continuation, and it looks like it's in Brewster. Can you just and actually the part in Orleans looks like a lot less than 9 miles. I'm just trying to reconcile the sequencing and that's coming later.
So hold on the reclaimed water questions. There's going to be a separate, we're going to get into that just after the sub-watersheds, okay? Yeah.
Regarding flows.
Yep.
Are the flows contemplated in these upcoming slides in gallons per day, according to the 208 that you're using for this analysis? Are they comparable to the amount of water that would be treated in the non-traditional bookend directly or not?
Go ahead.
The kilogram removal requirement is the same. Non-traditional solutions don't treat water.
Can't hear you, see you.
Stand up.
Oh, sure.
Speak louder.
So the flows are not comparable, but the removal
The
is.
kilogram, the mass removal requirement to achieve the CNDL are the same.
Thank you, Mike.
So I just wanted to be, I'm going to, and this is my last slide, and then Lou is going to talk about each individual basement. So I just wanted to be clear, basically. You know, what we just talked about is a bookend. It's not a recommendation at this point. So what's going to happen, and this is going to start tomorrow with our team, we're going to take the best of the non-traditional bookend ideas, and Sia's going to champion that. We're going to combine it with the best of the traditional bookend ideas. In other words, what's hard to do in non-traditional, we may have to address in a traditional approach. And those two will combine to create a hybrid Orleans alternative for detailed discussion. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be taking the two extremes, and we're going to be putting them together into a hybrid.
You define
So-
what best means.
Sorry, I just want to hold comments on this point. So we'll get back to this as, when we get into our next steps. So
Okay.
just have this in the back of your mind, but we'll get more into it.
Okay. So at this point, I'm going to turn the discussion over to Lou. He's going to talk about each sub-watershed and why we're suing different areas.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Again, my name is Lou Sirocco. I'll try to take you through each sub-watershed. We'll start with Pleasant Bend. Aries Pond. So at the top, you have the reduction target for that sub-watershed area, 141 kilograms. It's the same reduction target that was used for non-traditional. It's just, that was what was established by the MEPs for that area. So the 208 preliminary scenario sewered an area that would get 161 kilograms out. The area that we have shown is approximately 269 kilograms per year. This was the area from the CWMP. It exceeded the goal. Where we exceed the goal, I leave it alone. If we want to have more discussions about removing some of those areas that were identified in the CWMP, I'd be happy to look and start removing some of those areas. But where we do fall short in subsequent areas, we did attempt to add as needed where it made the most sense. So the flow associated with that area is around 7,400 gallons a day, and that light green area will potentially go to the Nemaquahat River LT10 sub-watershed for treatment and disposal. And obviously, septic needs will still be, but at this point in time, handled by the Tri-Town facility.
So the 7,400 gallons per day of wastewater flow is just the green portion within the
Just the green
sub-watershed
portion
boundary?
within the red lines.
Right.
And the red lines, I'm sorry, that's a good point. Red lines represent all the little sub-watersheds that fall within the Aries Pond designated area. And Aries Pond designated area is listed in Tracker, and all these sub-watersheds are also listed in that. So it gets, some of them get pretty complicated, some of them are very simple.
And just so we just have this stated, the assumptions about fertilizer and stormwater in the bookends are comparable to the assumptions about stormwater and fertilizer in the non-traditional bookend. And right now, they're at 25% of the load of the fertilizer and stormwater, and they will be, like the other one, refined as we go forward. Just want to make sure everyone's clear.
Correct.
Just one quick question. 62 lots.
Yes.
Am I correct that those 62 lots are in the light green area bounded by the red to the east only?
Yes. Only. Correct.
So there's nothing in Brewster that's you've included?
No, I did not include anything in any other town on any of these slides.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Lonnie's Pond area. That one this is one of the areas that gets a little more complicated. So the reduction target is 193 kilograms per year. You can see that area comprises a whole bunch of sub-watersheds, as you can see by the red lines. The traditional scenario showed 228 kilograms per year sewered out with its associated flow. The light green and a little bit into the purple behind Crystal Lake account for about 291 kilograms per year. Again, this was the CWMP defined area. As it was above the target, no additional lots were added.
Did you clarify why the Orleans modified bookend has more on the last slide, but on this one as well, has more kilograms per year from sewered lots.
There is a calculation in Tracker. They use a flow-through coefficient. So that basically tells you the effectiveness of the wastewater you're removing. So the flow-through coefficient can be anywhere from 0 to 1. 1 being 1 kilogram taken out equals 1 kilogram taken out in the saltwater estuary. And if it's anything below that, that means there's something that has removed it along the way. For instance, Crystal Lake, if the septic system upstream of Silver Lake is sewered, you only get half the credit because the assumption is Crystal Lake takes out half of that nitrogen before it gets to the saltwater estuary. So sewering more behind the freshwater ponds helps you less in terms of the TMDLs.
So is the answer, just to say, so that is to say, because the Orleans modified traditional bookend is more concerned about the freshwater ponds than the 208 preliminary traditional scenario, and that explains that difference?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, I just wanted.
There's two elements to that concern. One is the pond
Right.
itself.
Well, yeah, it's also the CWMP, but I assume that's why the CWMP.
I think that's a really important point to speak to your, the concern about all this work that was done on the CWMP is not this traditional bookend. I think at least in the two sub-watersheds that we've talked about, and we should identify this probably in each of the sub-watersheds, I believe the Stantec traditional sewering is what was defined in the CWMP. Is that?
It is everywhere except for two sub-watersheds.
Okay, so maybe that's helpful too.
So this map isn't the sewering.
Did you have a question about this?
I'm sort of curious. The reduction target is 193 kilograms a year. The 208 preliminary is 228. So where is it implied in a 208 scenario the wastewater is going?
They have different scenarios.
Yeah, but if it's not going back into this watershed,
Right.
then why is it 228? It should be 193.
Well, again, I think what they did was they took, and I don't want to speak on their behalf.
Instead of answering now, why don't you just
Sure.
try to look into it?
All set with this one? Meeting House Pond. So the reduction target, about 1,600 kilograms per year. The removal goal was 100% in this particular sub-watershed. So both the 208 and our bookends and the CWMP all had 100% of this area being sewered. So that's about 338 lots, approximately 44,000 gallons a day. A portion of it would be going to the Atlantic Ocean Satellite Treatment Facility, and a small portion in the purple would continue on to the Tri-Town. And then we put the bullet on most of those sides where it's pertinent. Solids treated at Tri-Town, that just means the solids from the satellite treatment facilities. So this is one
Sorry,
of those.
just one more thing. On this one, is that the same as CWMP? The meeting house pond?
Yes,
Is that-
yes it was. This one is not the same as the CWMP. And the reason being the satellite treatment facility in this area. It was slightly below the goal for, even if it was all being transported out, the CWMP was slightly below the goal, so we did add a little bit, but then we had to add even more once we figured out that a satellite facility would be discharging in this area. So that's why you'd see the 569 number, which is quite high, compared to the 343 from the traditional plan and the goal of 340. And pretty much everything would be going to that satellite facility. There's a small sliver that goes to the other one, but that's just the way it shook out.
Sims.
So, just to do the other side of the math on that, the presumption is that there is some 320 or 220 kilograms going back in through effluent disposal?
Correct.
Well, That means a very, very small, 80% or 90% reduction in this, I mean, it's a very low nitrogen removal in this system. So this has to do with what nitrogen reduction system you select for this scenario.
And all the assumptions everywhere and all treatment was the assumption that it would be treating it down to 5 total nitrogen.
From an initial, what's the assumption of the initial going in?
The initial going in, where all this was, see it's smiling. The initial assumption is that 26.25 milligrams per liter hits the water table from each septic system.
0.25.
So 80%.
Jeff?
81% is what we put in track today.
At some point, will you look at the trade-off between doing the sewering of additional properties and transporting this water, perhaps to the Atlantic watershed, where you can dispose of it there and reduce the number of properties? I mean, there's some sort of a...
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that would be almost the next step that we take. We just need to take the disposal sites a step further to know where we can...
It's okay, I just...
Yep. No.
Chris?
I just had a quick question on the clarification of the map. On the legend, so just west of 21, is that being identified, Kenrick Woods, as a disposal site with known restrictions? And I should have maybe, if it's out of context, let me know, but just so I understand when I'm looking at the map, is that what's being reflected on just west of 21?
21.
Or just
yes.
west of that?
That's, I believe that's a privately owned
Private
parcel.
lot, 2 acres, owned by the people who sold the land for Kenrick Woods.
Okay, gotcha.
It's still privately owned.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know where it's appropriate to raise this question, but, and I do understand that this is all being driven by nitrogen and the nitrogen TMDL, but for our freshwater ponds, phosphorus obviously is the limiting nutrient. Where you say we don't get as much credit for upgradient for nitrogen removal, you would certainly be benefiting a freshwater pond with phosphorus. I'm assuming that both traditional centralized treatment and satellite can also address phosphorus removal and is being considered as part of whatever ends up being the hybrid.
Yes, that's all possible, yes.
Possible, but is it being considered? It needs to be considered because we have declining water quality in our freshwater ponds also.
When you sewer the area
Yeah.
around the freshwater pond, and you get it away from the pond, you will eliminate the phosphorus.
Well, that's why I wanted to make sure it's also going to treat for phosphorus, whatever is decided on in the future. Okay.
Will treat phosphorus.
It may not treat for phosphorus because we're doing groundwater disposal away from the ponds. And the key is to meet the nitrogen TMDL, but to get the phosphorus away from the freshwater pond. So when we go out to the satellite treatment facility, where now the effluent disposal is away from the ponds, we will treat for nitrogen to meet the TMDL, and we'll get whatever phosphorus treatment we get. But then it'll be put into the ground as effluent disposal, and not impact the freshwater. Is that clear?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. All set on this one? Hawa Pond, no change from the CWMP. 400 was the target. Cape Cod initial scenario 392, and our bookend has 457 kilograms per year stored out. That's 104 lots, almost 13,000 gallons a day. And part of it would be going to the light green satellite facility. Part of it would be going down below to the alternate site, Site 25.
Minor request, would you, when you do these, can you also place the number of the site on to the site to the...
Sure. I may have done my screen capture before we numbered them.
That's fine.
All right, so Poachie Neck, target 1,434. The 208 initial scenario, 1,459. So, okay, on this one, you'll notice the number here, 1148. So that's no change from the CWMP. We're slightly, we're below the target. However, you take into account the credit you get from stormwater and fertilizer, you're within the 5%, which is considered to be within the accuracy of the tools that we're using. So I just want to point out that we need to keep an eye on that one to verify those fertilizer stormwater numbers are in fact what we're getting. But in order to not have to rely on that, we would have to expand the Seward area.
I'm struggling with this a little bit. Using this as an example, exactly where are you proposing to put the sewers?
Every road that's within the, so it would be sewers that would capture wastewater from all of the parcels highlighted.
So the colored portions of the map indicate Seward areas.
Only within the red
For
line.
that watershed, yeah.
Right. So this one is looking at the ones within the red line. But all of the colored areas are being proposed.
Every lot that has a color shaded in, it's getting sewered in some fashion. That will be determined once we determine the actual areas to be sewered.
So the ones that are to the left of the red line there appear as sewering in another one of the...
Different
Correct.
subwatershed.
Just a different subwatershed, correct. Yep.
Lou, on this one here, you distinguish the fertilizer stormwater load.
Yes.
On the other ones you didn't.
Correct.
Why?
Because it doesn't matter on the other ones. We're meeting the goal without fertilizer stormwater, so I guess I just didn't highlight it on those slides. On this particular one, we don't meet the goal without it, unless we sewer more.
So just to be clear, it sounds like in the other ones, if the CWMP area, even when you add the stormwater and fertilizer, if you were exceeding it, if the CWMP was exceeding it, you kept it anyway. You didn't cut down the sewering area.
No, I didn't cut it down, but I recognize we can, but I didn't want to arbitrarily start cutting down areas.
Yeah.
Right?
I think one of the things I can just comment on here is that
TMDL is based on
given the uncertainty on the stormwater load especially, less, but still some on the fertilizer, there is a question, and we'll deal with this with the project team, as to whether they should be counted on or not with regard to the actual compliance, or whether that should be a contingency buffer. That a lot of towns are looking at that being a contingency buffer, because no model is accurate to 100th decimal place in terms of this. So we recognize that this is the MEP studies and everything out of them is approximate. They're dated, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe we should be using fertilizer and stormwater not as part of the compliance to meet the letter of the TMDL, but as something that gives us a factor of safety above it as we go forward. That's just a question.
And I would say that I left this one that way in order to have that conversation.
Okay.
I would just think it would be helpful, because I'm confused, since there's a lot of overlap in subwatersheds and a lot of red lines, that if you could somehow on each of these areas identify exactly where those 284 lots on this particular slides were by hash marks or different color or something, because I'm confused exactly what boundaries are the red lines and the orange color.
So what you're saying, Sid, is the color, this area here, different than that area.
Whichever one contains those lots, correct. It's confusing. And I think it'll be helpful when we go to overlay this with non-traditional systems, when we're trying to determine, along with the cost estimates, which system to go with in those areas.
So I understand it, all the properties in this colored area would have a conventional sewer. All the waste totally would be taken to the treatment facility where the solids would be separated. An alternative to that, which I know is not included here, would be just to use existing septic tanks and take the wastewater to the treatment facilities.
Stag, yes, correct.
And where is that in the whole process?
That has another panel discussion that will be, that'll be one of the main talks during that one.
But it would not impact
the amount of areas and the amount of lots that we're considering. Because we're taking the nitrogen out one way or another.
No, to follow up what Jeff says, we haven't talked about the cost of the collection system. It would impact the collection system.
It would impact the collection system and potentially cost us.
December 3rd. Jim?
Can we, it feels like we're not establishing enough of a record to track back to the 208. Like, when we do the numbers, can we make sure, like, it feels like we're saying that the 208 numbers sometimes reflect stormwater and don't. I think that we need to have, even if the 208 numbers need to be updated, reflecting what happened in Mashpee this week, then let's just correct them. But I find it very difficult to understand our numbers from meeting to meeting, particularly if selectively we're including stormwater and selectively we're not. I think we need a tighter financial model.
Yeah.
Could we do a summary table, Lou, that for sub-watershed, does this accounting pulls it out and shows the different categories of removal and stuff?
And a piece of that that's very important, and I know we may disagree on that, I think we have to explicitly tie back to where 208 is.
Now,
And
one of
just
the big
because-
differences between our bookend and the 208 bookend, as was pointed out in the previous, one of the previous meetings, was they don't sewer anything behind a freshwater pond.
I'm just talking, I'm like an auditor. I just need numbers that I can tell. You can explain the difference, but right now, it feels like we're doing a show.
Yeah. I just want to say, the 208 preliminary traditional scenario that we're working from was like a frame in a movie at a certain point, right? And that we're working from that sort of fixed, we're not updating as the 208 updates. We're not updating that piece of it. So to the extent they are a moving target, our vision is one, we're taking from that one period of time as our comparative point. Our piece is moving, and we're showing you changing pieces, but their piece was still in progress, and we just needed a place to go. And we don't want to necessarily have to keep going back and dealing with two moving trains at the same time.
But you're going to get yourself in trouble. If when we're done, we come up with scenarios and the 208 publishes their numbers and we haven't coordinated our work with them, you're going to get crucified.
Hold on, we are. That's what we're talking about with coordinating with 208 and the tracker and our work. The fact is, what Stacy's saying is you can't have them, if we had 208s moving at the same time we're doing this, you would be no way you could track this. So we had to pick a frame. We're going to do the planning, then we come back and check in, and these numbers may have to be tweaked here and there to make it compliant with 208.
As long as we make the commitment that as we close this out, as we move closer to decisions, that we will be aligning with the 208.
Yes.
Because what happened in Mashpee the other night is they published the wrong numbers on their fertilizer stuff, and they used that to justify. They passed fertilizer bylaw, but they used it based upon old numbers. And people were questioning that at town meeting, as they should.
Well, and I think it's partly why the commission is backing off, trying to publish a 208 scenario for the Lower Cape, because they want us to do that work. They don't want to confuse the matter by continuing putting out their thing. They want us to do our own work, consistent with their approach, consistent with their tools, but not, we don't have to meet their number. So that's, I think, what we're trying to do. And we're working with them as we do our process.
When we're meeting their number, we're not necessarily the same area, not the same
We're
way.
not meeting their approach.
Yeah, just, I'm sorry, just another little subject, but trying to follow this. Am I interpreting correctly that you are basically over-sewering? You said that to get...
Potentially in this area, we might be under-sewering.
In that one, but on the others, we're over-sewering. Probably overall...
In terms of the TMDL.
Well, that's, to me, that's important, because as we get into the costs...
Well, yeah, I mean...
As we get into the costs of the collection system, and I want to be sure that we're looking at numbers that we can adequately compare, and not truthfully give the disadvantage to this approach because the collection system costs are too high. I think you have to get down. You have to make judgment on where you're going to cut down the sewering in order to do what needs to be done for the TMDLs, no more, no less.
And I guess I would look for input on how we would eliminate certain areas.
I think, too, just, there's, that is the goal and the purpose, and we will get there. Some of those decisions are design-level decisions. If you're going down a street with a sewer, and you have 3 failing septic systems, this is an example, you have 3 failing septic systems, but you get down 10 houses and you decide, well, we met our TMDL, but we're not going to extend that down the rest of the street. That's not a good decision to base limiting sewer on. You would extend it down there. There's other reasons like that that are made at a design level that decide whether you use step steg or whether you do this or that to save money where it's feasible. We'll get into all that, but some of those decisions, right now we're getting within 10%. Those kind of decisions are fine-tuning that we'll get certainly at the next stage, but even at design level, there's going to be a little bit of tweaking here and there as we go along. See what I mean?
Judith, and then Jeff.
And just a comment to David's question. I mean, a piece of this is the freshwater ponds, and the TMDLs speak to nitrogen. They don't speak to phosphates. So it's very possible that one of SEA's floating constructed wetlands is going to solve all the problems that we need for our freshwater ponds, and we don't need to think about storing them. But we do need to address freshwater ponds and phosphates, whether it's through the sewering or whether it's through an alternative. The other is just a really basic question, and forgive me, but Paul's previous comment that all the colored areas are sewered, and you said yes, is it all the colored areas or all the colored areas within the red line?
On any particular slide,
I've lost it.
On any particular slide, I'm only talking about the colored areas within the perimeter of the red.
Within the red line.
But so, look.
The other ones show up on another slide.
Right, if you look at the map as a whole, all the colored areas are part of a proposed, this scenario sewering. If you're trying to count the 284 that we're zooming in on here, it's within the red line.
Okay.
Okay, Jeff, and then,
David, to your comment, part of the over-sewering is because the decision was made for the purposes of this, to dispose of the effluent in the watershed.
I understand that. but
So
part of it-
if you were to decide to ship it to a non-nitrogen sensitive watershed, then you could reduce the sewering. That's a trade-off that needs to be made.
That's some of it, but
That's some of it, the freshwater ponds another piece.
Yes, and I think this may relate to just the comment. My memory is that our approved CWMP proposed less sewering than is what in the 208 bookend.
That's what Judith said before.
Much less.
So what I'm,
In terms
what I'm,
of,
see, what I'm suggesting here is, and I use the term approved, by the Cape Cod Commission and the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs. It is an approved plan to remove. Now, what we're doing, and this is what Jeff is getting at, is we are not discharging anything in Namskaket. We are discharging back into some nitrogen-sensitive watersheds. But I think we ought to make sure that we do not forget that there was a sewer footprint that had been approved by the regulators. And although it's not shown here, we ought to remind ourselves every once in a while that that's the case. And I fully understand that as we create other discharge sites in nitrogen-sensitive areas, we have to sewer more, but I think we need to keep that in mind.
just to emphasize that point, there are 2 slides, 2 sub-watersheds where we added lots. Otherwise, it is the same as the CWMP.
As the CWMP.
Correct.
Okay. So I think we should make sure that we say that here so that people like me don't ask that question.
And I do have notes in the tech memo that point that out.
All right, fine.
Excuse me, that doesn't seem to make sense, because you just said CMWMP is substantially less than that.
I didn't say, I hope I didn't say substantially, but it's less.
All right, but is that, because here it looks like you're exceeding what 208 was requiring, if CW, I mean, how can
We're
both of
exceeding
those states be true?
Well, on this particular side, we're not exceeding
In general,
208.
most of them.
But on, yeah, a couple of the previous ones we were, and only because that's the area that was identified in the CWMP.
And I should apologize, I did read the technical memo, and I remember that you had CWMP items in there, so it's just not appearing here.
Stacy, if I could
Yeah.
just a point of clarification. If, on some of the earlier slides, it looked like there was areas being sewered more than was necessary to meet the target. The reason that it's shown that way is because the area that's being sewered is compatible with what was shown in the CWMP. The folks who put the CWMP together did not have the advantage of this tool when they did their work. So it made a lot of sense to us that the scenario that we put numbers, using the tracker, we put numbers to the scenario that people were familiar with. That's a good place to start. And we, as Steve has said, this is not a recommendation, it's a bookend. But I just want to make that point clear, that if it looks like we're sewering more than we need to, we are. According to the tracker, it tells us we're sewering more than we need to. So we can make those adjustments to limit those areas to meet your desire to sewer what we need to, not more.
Unless there are other, unless there are other reasons to sewer those areas.
So let me just put this as a question to the group. So it sounds like what this bookend does is it takes the CWMP and it goes beyond the CWMP sewer areas for particular reasons, right? For particularly because when you re-discharge the effluent into the water body that's already nitrogen sensitive, that increases it. That seems like the main reason, right?
That's the only
main reason.
Watershed.
Into the watershed. So the question to the group is what that results in. When you put these things through Tracker, it looks like there is the potential to reduce in some of these subwatersheds the sewering lower than what was suggested in the CWMP.
Potentially,
Right?
yeah.
And the question I have to the group is, do you want to see an additional modification that does that? Or do you feel like you don't really want to go, or leave that to the consultants to do, and we want to wait and do that maybe together, where we decide which makes sense and which don't? So Sid and then...
I don't have a trouble with, at this point in time, having the over numbers, because when we overlay this with the non-traditional, we're going to be removing lots anyway, and that's why I was saying the clarification of knowing exactly where those homes are in the subwatersheds, because when we overlay the PMBs or agriculture, whatever it's going to be, we have to identify those particular lots that we can take out and those that we can't. So I don't see the sense in changing
Yeah,
it now.
for instance, I seem to recall in Pawa Pond, is that correct, Sia, where you had a PRB, and I'm just using it as an example. If that PRB was installed there, then that would mean, yeah, let's not sewer. We could potentially not sewer those lots. Just an example.
So I think what Sid was then suggesting is, look, maybe we recognize that this bookend over sewers potentially for the TMDLs, but we're just going to use it with that knowledge as we take the next step forward into that.
So, Tracker originally was not using actual water flows. It was using the Cape Cod Commission's generic, we figured this out for all of Cape Cod. So you're saying you've adjusted it to actual water flows for Orleans, for property by property?
Correct. It is linked to
Okay.
that same 6-month-old water use database per lot. And what they do is they take 90% of the water use.
Okay, so the other point that I was going to make is, again, the CWMP was based on 20 to 30 year build-out. The Tracker and the Cape Cod Commission work is today with no provision for that whatsoever. So you're looking at apples to oranges, and as we go forward, I get very confused and concerned about what are the assumptions behind this, and are we talking about the same things? And once we get into then putting on top of that alternative technologies, I, for one, am going to be lost, completely lost as to what we're talking about and how we're comparing one thing to the next.
Okay, so I think that's a key action item. It's got to get addressed, that question about build-out, or what are the numbers for, that we're working toward. So that'll get.
Yeah, just quickly, maybe somewhat of a analogous to what Judith's saying, but to me, I'm satisfied with what Sid had to say. I think that's a good approach. But I think we have to recognize, if we're going to use the tracker, that the output of that tracker has to be somewhere within the flow process as to where we're going down the way. And it's a question of being comfortable with the tracker. But we've got to, if we're going to use it, we've got to use the output of it.
Okay. Yeah, Karen.
Just a clarification, so the except for this sub-watershed, so far you have not included the fertilizer and stormwater.
No, I didn't.
You just
point
didn't
it out.
highlight it?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's there.
Okay.
56 kilograms in Powwow Pond. I didn't point it out because we're already sewing 157 kilograms.
Okay, so you have assumed that. So follow-up question then would be, at what point in this process will the vetting of those numbers take place? To know how reliable as a reduction factor those numbers would
The
be.
stormwater and fertilizer?
Right, for either bookend.
I think that plays into the adaptive management plan where we come up with monitoring schedules to determine how effective those strategies are.
Well, then, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. Well, just a comment. I mean, I because there's so little certainty about those numbers, and we are going to be overlaying bookends that incorporate those numbers as reduction factors where we don't have a high level of confidence of their reliability, it seems to me that step should happen before we do the putting together of the bookends.
It could also be addressed in, the areas that we want to sewer first, and then the areas maybe that we aren't so certain about, maybe we need to extend. Those come later on after we've done some monitoring to determine the actual effectiveness of these thermal fertilizer bylaws.
We're looking at updating the fertilizer study. That's going to happen soon here to include the new lots in town and some different assumptions that they're making there. So that will allow us to be more refined in the estimate of fertilizer credit that we get. The same thing with stormwater. There's a number of different stormwater activities the town is working through right now that are all interrelated, and putting that together in a analysis of, okay, what does that mean with regard to water quality, et cetera, will give us a better number than blanket 25% of stormwater nitrogen load. On the other hand, you come from the other side, you also still have the uncertainty about that. Those numbers are going to be very general numbers, and you're talking about 25% of some percentage of the total nitrogen load, and so and stormwater is hard to get nitrogen out, so you're talking about a pretty small percentage here, and that's why I was saying we have to be careful about how much we want to factor that in as a line item in our TMDL compliance, because I'm not sure that we're well within the noise level of the general models that developed this stuff in the beginning. We're much too refined when we're saying 2.3% of the 25% of the stormwater load, yada yada. So I'm thinking we want to do that. We want to get the best information we can, but maybe that is our freeboard, our contingency factor that we shouldn't use for TMDL compliance exactly.
And I just, because of time, I think we've noted we need to have more conversation about this, and we need to be more thoughtful and more clear about how this all plays in as we go forward. I don't want to get more into it now. So let me just say one thing, Judith, and I'll come to you, okay? Because here's my proposal, because we really do want to talk, at least give you guys an overview of the financial model today, all right? So my proposal is that if there's any others that are different from the CWMP, we just show that one. Otherwise, you guys have the tech memo, you have this, you kind of get the methodology here, and the specific, any other specific comments you have about the sub-watersheds, you can share with us if you have them quickly now or afterward.
Just really fast, an action item list. Could we just know when and by whom tracker will be vetted?
Yes.
That's all I want to know. Who is going to be vetting it, and when will it be done, and when will it be available?
Yep.
You mentioned that you assume 26 milligrams a liter for the input.
It was my assumption, that is
But-
the assumption, but yes.
Just want to suggest, why don't you check with the Chatham sewage treatment plant and find out what nitrogen levels they're receiving from their sewage line, and look through the literature and see if it's reasonable, because on West Road, there is a unit, and it's over 30 milligrams a liter for the influent, and it may be closer to 50. So I would suggest, has to do with the percent nitrogen removal that you assume. It's important, so please
Yep,
do it.
so don't answer that yet, don't answer that yet. That's going on the to-do list, okay? I'm sorry to do this, but I want to make sure that we get through what we need to get through. All right, and, so, is there any other?
So I'll just touch on the highlights here. No change in Quonset Pond. The river upper, no change from the CWMP. The river lower, small area was added to the river lower. It was slightly below the target. Little Names.
Slightly below the target?
Correct.
So you added some lots.
I added some lots to meet the target, yep. Little Namskakit, the reduction target is negative 1,200 approximately, so it has some capacity for nitrogen, and I'm showing it also, it's a part of it shows up in the downtown economic development area in the dark purple, and it's approximately 12,600 gallons per day in that area. But there's no TMDL goal that needs to be met in that particular one.
Lou, one critical point on that one, the final bullet.
Oh.
Is it you do?
Thank you. As it was pointed out earlier, what happens when we start discharging all the treated effluent into Little Namskakit? Well, if you discharge the 250,000 gallons per day that we showed on a previous slide into Little Namskakit, the new reduction target would be negative 455, which is indicating there'd still be some uptake availability. However, if everything goes to Tri-Town, that could be a problem.
You're afraid of me, I know.
No, I'm not. There's several properties along West Road that already have nitrogen reduction facilities. Have you taken credit for those? The Shaw's Plaza, the Cape Cod 5 Bank, Orleans Place, they've already got nitrogen reduction systems. There should be credit for that.
There should be. I'd have to check to make sure that we are.
Okay, cool, that's on our action.
We'll tweak it.
Namskakit Creek, where the current discharge is, I only throw this slide up to point out the TMDL reduction target is negative 9,482. This is another one I want to point out. Mill Pond, the 208 scenario did not have any sewering in this area. This is the same as the CWMP. I just want to point out that for this particular subwatershed, there is no TMDL target removal needed, but it was in the CWMP, presumably, from what I gathered from Red Tide.
My understanding from speaking with Brian Dudley, and he's not here, but my understanding is there was for the entire Nauset estuaries, there was a percentage reduction. And then there was one specified for Town Cove. Anything that wasn't specifically specified is the overall reduction. So it's not that there's no TMDL. It is what was reduced with the entire
Mill
area.
Pond
It
does
just
have a
wasn't
specific
specified.
reduction.
I believe it was the 65% or the 55%. I'd have to go back to the MEP report.
We have the MEP, we can give that to you where it shows that, yeah.
Oh, I've got it. Trust me.
Just to clarify, red tide is not restricted to Mill Pond. It's an issue in the Nauset estuary.
We were just looking for
Okay.
reasons why that might have been
It's not
sewered.
specifically limited to Mill Pond.
Correct, yeah, no, right.
Okay, so we'll look into that.
Okay, best for last. Town Cove. So the reduction target, 5,700 kilograms per year. So the 208 scenario, sewered enough lots to get 5794, meeting the goal. Now, that 208 plan was approximately 102,000 gallons per day from Orleans. So when we took the CWMP and ran our simulations, the area that was identified was actually 121,000 gallons per day. And the reason why there's a difference is 208 takes into account flows from East Hampton. So to point out, if you sewered everything in Town Cove in Orleans, you can't meet the target in Orleans alone.
Right, so just to be clear, this came up at the last meeting, the question of, is this plan taking care of the entire problem or Orleans' portion of the problem? So this is Orleans' portion of the problem.
So if you look, what we're saying is this highlighted area would take out 4,282 kilograms per year. So if you go through the reduction target and you look at the total amount of nitrogen that comes from all lots in Town Cove in Orleans, that accounts for approximately 72.5% going into Town Cove. So applying that percentage to the reduction goal, you would need to remove approximately 4,161 for that same portion. Doing the same thing for Eastham, it comes out to approximately 1,578 kilograms per year. So a traditional bookend for Eastham might look like some fertilizer, stormwater be taken out, some sewered lots, which based on the information available through their tools is approximately 366 lots in Eastham. Based on the average contribution, it would be approximately 254 would need to be sewered for their portion.
Okay, so let's move on quickly to the financial model. We've limited time, but we really want to make sure we give this.
We had 3 slides on reclaimed water that we can run through now, or we can hold for another time.
Hold, please, sorry. Is that okay with people that we hold the reclaimed water?
Let's
We
move
just
on.
want to give you guys this overview, food for thought, before we move on, so that we can get any input as this part of the project is moving forward.
Okay, hi, my name is Doug Gardner, and I will be the person working on the financial model. So the goal here today is just to give you a brief overview of the structure of the model. There are no hard numbers, obviously, at this point. Just a little bit of theory and the direction that we're moving in. First and foremost, it's going to be custom designed for you. You own this, it's your information. There's nothing boilerplate about it. One of the goals, and really the important goal, is to make it transparent, as simple as possible, and as straightforward as possible. We're going to have numerous scenarios in there. We're going to evaluate septage only and septage and wastewater options. We're going to look at design, build, operate, and design, bid, and build with contract operations. We're going to include operation and management of a full range of both traditional and non-traditional systems and their facilities, including monitoring. We're going to address both the short-term costs and the long-term costs. We will consider phasing in the projects, and we'll look at the life cycle costs of all projects. It's very important that we're going to establish, in my belief, that we should establish an enterprise fund for the wastewater. So the financial model will be based on enterprise principles. User rates, tipping fees, asset management fees, otherwise known as indirect costs, reserves will all be factored into the financial model. The last thing you actually design during a rate study or a financial model are the rates themselves. What we want to do is we want to look for all sources of funding and all sources of external revenue. See what we can go out, that's out there that's not flow generated or septage generated. Any amount that we bring in ultimately keeps the cost down to the homeowner. Very important that the rates and charges be defensible. They have to be legal. They have to be based on sound rate-making principles. I'll ensure that the rates here in Orleans and the charges in Orleans are defensible. The model will produce graphical results for ease of understanding. Pictures worth 1,000 words. As a consultant, that's not usually what we like to hear, but it really is. So graphs, statistical data will all be summarized, presented in a clear and hopefully easy to understand format. And importantly is we're going to run a sensitivity analysis to confirm that it's affordable. This has to be affordable. So that'll be a big factor in the financial assessment. That's the, excuse me, going through the bulleted portions pretty quickly. Stacy, do we want to open it up to questions now?
I think maybe do the model and then open it to questions.
So, the financial model. And this is just going to be a flow chart we've been working on. We have the initial hybrid projects. This has not been developed yet. We've looked at both bookends. The next goal, or the next phase, will be to develop the hybrid approach. That will consist of both non-traditional, which are the PRBs, the aquaculture, coastal wetlands, and then the traditional, which is the centralized sewer system, the alternate disposal sites, and the satellite systems. From there, we will look at the O&M costs. The O&M costs will be, in all likelihood, funded through rates and charges. We'll look at the capital costs. That's debt. And the administrative costs, those will be funded through user rates. Administrative costs are salaries, indirect costs, non-debt related, capital, and reserves. That all flows into the financial model. What I showed you in the previous flow charts, that all funnels into the financial model. From the financial model, we look for the funding sources, tipping fees, reclaimed water revenue, betterments, tax contributions, grants, fees, connections. We're going to look at everything. Any revenue source that's out there, we're going to look at, we're going to bring in. They may not all be applicable to this, but we're going to look at everything. We're taking a macro approach to all of this. From there, we factor in the Orleans, the Eastham, and the Brewster flows, sewage flows, septage flows, food waste. From there, we are able to determine what our phasing options are going to be. We'll come up with an initial rate scenario that we'll present to you. You'll like parts of it, you won't like parts of it. You'll say, I like this, let's do a little more of this. I don't like this, let's get away from that. And that'll be the sewer fees, the septage fees, the food waste fees, et cetera, et cetera. I'll go back, crunch the numbers, come up with another set of rate scenarios for you. Hopefully we'll get more we like that than we don't like that. I'll go back, make some additional changes, and then ultimately come up with a consensus rate. Hopefully one we can all agree on and we can all believe in. From there, that'll be included in the financial plan in the revised CWMP. So in 8 minutes, that's the entire financial process. I'm sure there are no questions.
All right, now, next question is.
Yes, I wanted just to give the committee the point of view of the Finance Committee. We've been discussing this with Doug and with Mike, and beyond the sort of obvious things of getting an accurate modeling of the capital costs and an accurate modeling of the operating costs over the life of the project, there are a couple things that we would like to highlight. We will be inviting Doug and Mike to a Finance Committee meeting next month to discuss these items. Of great importance to the committee is the sensitivity analysis to reflect potential changes in all the projects as they go forward, because as we all know, big capital projects are never accurately projected, and so we need to have a sense of the probability, one way or another, of greater or lower costs, both on the capital side and the operating side going forward. And to that end, we will be asking the consultants, and we'll be participating in a Monte Carlo analysis, which is a probability analysis of the outcomes of certain scenarios. So we will be able to say with what degree of confidence the likely outcomes are for any one particular project. Also very important is for us to identify and to model good benchmarks and good comparable metrics. And this is something that we've, I think, seen highlighted today, is that a traditional bookend is not directly comparable to a non-traditional bookend because they are not really like-for-like systems. You're not looking at gallons per day in a non-traditional bookend, and you're looking at different capital costs for the traditional bookend. So finding those appropriate metrics in terms of dollars per gallon treated, dollars per kilogram of nitrogen removed. How do we consider phosphorus? Do we consider phosphorus in our comparable analysis of systems and outcomes? How do we look at total maximum daily load across systems? Give you an example. In the traditional bookend, it's unclear, at least to me today, whether or not the cost, both the capital cost and the operating cost, would or should include the nitrogen removed by fertilizer and stormwater treatment. Because we're giving ourselves credit for that here, but it's unclear how that will factor into both the capital and the operating cost of each system. So key in this analysis is coming up with those good comparables so that we can say we have a like-for-like analysis and can make a relevant comparison, because that's going to be a huge factor in our choice, or in the choices that we make going forward, because it's clear that we're not going to go 100% down one road without considering all the others. The reduction targets we need to pin down, I think, more accurately, because from what I could tell today, they're kind of scattered. So we need to agree really what we're going to focus on our reduction targets. So really, what we're trying to get at is a like-for-like comparison so that we can have a good discussion about what are we actually achieving financially.
Yeah, and I just want to say, so, you know, we have this, this starts at the initial hybrid plan, and there's going to be a range of hybrid plans, right? So this suggests we're not costing out these bookends for you. We're going to start the costing out once we start with the hybrids, and maybe in the process of trying to put together the hybrids. And a lot of the things you're talking about is making sure that our process of figuring out what the cost of those hybrids are is really something you feel comfortable and the group feels comfortable with. So that's definitely a piece of it feeding into the model. And then the model also then looks at, once we have that number, what are the different ways of how it gets paid for, or.
And as I said at the last meeting, I think it's very important that we not discuss, or not discuss, that we not put out to the public for consumption numbers until we have a very high degree of certainty, because if we do, we're going to end up over-promising and under-delivering, which is the worst thing we can do financially.
And just to throw this out maybe a little early, but Mike and I were talking about, as we start to get into putting together the hybrid, if we give you no numbers, it's hard for you to say, should we do sewering or should we do a PRD? However, if we try to give you the right numbers, they're not going to be the right numbers. So one thought we had is, like, think of as a guide with the $1 sign, $2 signs, $3, like thinking more in just the comparative route, right? So that's an idea we're playing with. If you have thoughts about that, you can let us know offline. But because we want to really be sensitive to that issue.
And offline, it would be very useful for people with more knowledge of sewage systems or wastewater treatment systems than the Finance Committee has, is to tell us or suggest what the relevant metrics are to compare non-like-for-like systems.
Yeah, and I think our team's going to be working explicitly on that question. Yes.
Just to follow up on costs, which are something that interests me a great deal. In one of the slides today, Joshua, you saw it, that study, which was done in 2008, looked at about 25 actual in-place alternative treatment systems. And so it was real publicly bid projects, and those were the costs. And there were other tables in that chart, in that report, that are still pretty valid. And I think that as I testified before the 208 a couple of weeks ago, pleading with the Cape Cod Commission to really focus on the costs, because I think there are a lot of costs in the matrix that are best guesses. And what Joshua was talking about, we don't have time for best guesses. We need what the real costs are going to be.
One comment on that, Alan, and I do agree totally with your comments on the range of the 208s. Keep in mind that that's one of the reasons our program here will include pilots and prototypes and stuff, because as much as you do at the 208 level, you can reduce those down, but site-specific issues on any particular site could put you outside the range, right? So that's why we're looking at local stuff. The other thing is, I think Joshua mentioned, and Doug, sensitivity analysis. That's what we really need to do in this risk management approach Joshua has. It does that. You can look and say, okay, what are the worst case risk conditions, the best case, project by project, or whole plan by whole plan. And your whole plan may come out to have a high risk. Make it back to one and say, well, we want to take this project, and this project, and exchange it for that, for the risk. So that's kind of where the engineering comes in.
Yeah, and I think we need to understand the spectrum of risk, because there is a cost at which we could agree a program that would essentially have zero risk. Right? We know that if we built an entire sewer for the entire town, it would have essentially zero risk as long as we costed it out at the max level. But that would be a bad idea, because that would be a $250 million plan. On the other end of the spectrum, we can say, okay, we have a plan that's going to cost $10, but it's going to have 99% risk of failure. So I think we have to accept that as we go to a more expensive solution, the more expensive we get, the less risk we're going to have. And one of the big choices we're going to have in the program as a whole is finding the acceptable balance between risk and cost.
Well, and I just want to be clear, adaptive management is built into this. So the adaptive management, I mean, the risk of not solving the problem is that you have to come back and do something else, right? Which is going to have a cost as well. So cost, that's going to fit in to that model. You'll spend the money twice, is the, right?
The other factor that you're missing there is efficacy. And it's risk and cost and efficacy. And the example you gave was with the $250 million zero risk. It's not zero risk. If you simply sewer the whole town and simply remove nitrogen, that's no guarantee of improving water quality or restoring the environment. And if our goal is doing...
that point's good.
Well,
I'm just nervous about time, and I think everyone's heard that one. So that's important to keep in mind.
It's not understood.
It's important to keep in mind. I know that we have just a few minutes before we go, so I want to keep it focused on any other comments or input on the financial model or on the things that we want to make sure that Doug is.
That's where the comparable metrics come.
How are you going to handle properties in town that already remove nitrogen and meet whatever their current requirements are? Because they may be cheaper than a betterment or a sewer installation. I'm talking about Shaw's and that area along the road. Second, you mentioned enterprise fund. I don't know quite what that means. And third, are you ignoring the town as running the operation like they do Tri-Town and the water treatment facility?
Everything's under consideration. How are we going to handle those that have already taken steps to reduce their nitrogen? That's going to be part of the public-private partnership. So everything's to be determined. Everything is on the table. I know I went through these slides very quickly. Usually don't speak quite so fast. But I had to get quite a bit of information. In a very short
Enterprise
time.
fund.
Can we hold, how long is your answer to the enterprise fund question, and can it wait?
I think it can wait, but
Okay.
enterprise fund is simply an accounting mechanism for municipalities. I've created many of these, and I can actually make a presentation at a future meeting.
Or even just a
I think definitely, we'll go into that.
It's fine.
Succinctly, what it is, it separates your financial from your general funds, so that you can control it.
I'm fine.
Thanks. Sorry to be so tough, guys, I just punching the clock here.
There was an S-curve that you were working on, Mike?
Yes.
Yeah, would that help? in
That
this?
also, sorry, I skipped that in the action items, that is also in progress. So our thought about that is, that's really gonna, we wanna feed that into the discussion that we're gonna have on adaptive management, because really that's what this is. What came out of that is, where are additional needs, where are there additional informational needs that we need to attend to, and how are we gonna handle that? And so we're gonna really get into detail on that meeting. Okay, public comment. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All right. All in favor? Aye.